Kia ora, and thank you for taking the time to be here. Today, I want to get a little bit personal because why not? A few weeks ago, I went for a mammogram. If you're not familiar with what this is, it's a scan that checks breast tissue for any early signs of cancer. It's one of those routine health checks that most of us don't think too much about until we're the ones standing in that room. Before we dive in, I do want to give you a bit of a heads up. Today, I am going to be talking about breast cancer and breast cancer data. It's an important conversation, and I appreciate you being here for it. I got my first mammogram when I turned 40. I followed my doctor's advice. They recommend 40 as the age to start screening. It felt like one of those responsible adult things you do, like getting a car serviced or checking your smoke alarms. Just a precaution. Walking into the clinic, I was nervous. I don't know if you've ever seen a mammogram machine before. Up close, they are very intimidating. They are cold, they are metallic, designed for function, not comfort. In the process itself, you're standing there, half undressed, pressed into a very unnatural position, completely exposed. But I reminded myself, I'm doing the right thing. I'm being proactive. I'll be fine. The nurses were lovely. They took the scans and then left to show them to the doctor. This is when I kind of let out a breath. The hard part was over, or so I thought. When the doctor walked back in, I expected a quick all clear and a reminder to maybe come back in a couple of years. Instead, he started talking about calcifications. The air in the room shifted. My stomach dropped. It was like a scene from a movie, but this time that was happening to me. And the strangest thing is that I'd never even considered this possibility. Not really, which is ridiculous. It's the whole point of screening, to catch something early. But I suppose I'd assumed I was just following protocol, checking a box, not actually stepping into a moment that could change everything. I was referred for a biopsy. The next available appointment was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks of waiting, 6 weeks of not knowing, 6 weeks of trying to act normal while my mind just spiraled through every possibility. The biopsy itself was another ordeal, another mammogram machine, but this time I was held there for what felt like forever while they extracted pieces of me, and then more waiting. Finally, the call came. Benign. I was lucky, incredibly lucky. That same year, nearly 4,000 women in New Zealand got a different call. A call that changed their lives, a call that said it's cancer. And that's why we screen. Because of my experience, I now get a mammogram every year. It gives me peace of mind. But in doing this, I'm also contributing to an unequal health system. What I didn't mention earlier is that in New Zealand, breast screening is only publicly funded for those aged 45 to 69. I was 40, so if I wanted to follow my doctor's advice, I had to pay $400 and something. I was fortunate I had the means to make that choice, but not everybody does, and that's the problem. In New Zealand, also known as Aotearoa, I am a Pākehā, which means someone with European heritage whose family came to Aotearoa as settlers. The Māori people are Indigenous. Pākehā have only been in Aotearoa for around 200 years. But in that time, colonisation has reshaped everything. Māori land was taken, their laws and culture were replaced, and many of their rights were stripped away. Some people think of colonisation as an event that took place centuries ago and is therefore not relevant today. But I don't see it this way. Colonisation isn't just history. It's a structure that still exists today. It's embedded in our systems, shapes our outcomes, and it often goes unnoticed because it's just become the norm. Yet there is a lens through which colonisation does show up in: data. Māori women are more likely to die from breast cancer than Pākehā women. This is just one example of the many health inequalities in Aotearoa. So why do Māori have higher death rates than Pākehā? These are the most cited reasons. Māori are more likely to live in deprived areas than Pākehā. Māori are less likely to access private healthcare than Pākehā. Māori are more likely to have comorbidities than Pākehā, which means that they have more than one disease. But the biggest reason cited is that Māori women are more likely to be diagnosed at a later stage, when their cancer has progressed, when treatment is more complex, and when survival rates are lower. Now, research shows that when a Māori and Pākehā woman enter the health system with a similar diagnosis, their outcomes are the same. This means that the issue isn't treatment, it's screening. The process that's meant to catch cancer early isn't working equally for everyone. This part of the system is inequitable. It's rare when this data is communicated that we talk about the system, how the system is failing, even though it is. Instead, we focus on the gap, the difference between those who get the more desired result and those who don't. This information may be presented in a graph like this, with little explanatory context. When looking at this kind of visual, many of us will focus on the deficit, and we make it personal to the group who is lacking. Māori live in more deprived areas. Māori don't use private healthcare. Māori don't screen early enough. And just like that, responsibility shifts to Māori. After decades of systemic oppression, they are still the ones being blamed. But here's the thing about oppression. For one group to be disadvantaged, another must be advantaged. The flip side of the deficit coin is privilege. Yet would you use this word when reporting on this data? Would you say that Pākehā are more likely to live in less deprived areas and use private healthcare because of generational wealth? Would you write that Pākehā have fewer barriers to achievement because they went through a school system built for their Pākehā culture? Probably not, because that's a narrative we're not used to seeing. But this is the power of narratives. Shifting the frame from Māori deficit to Pākehā privilege doesn't just change the conversation, it makes the system visible. Māori are not seen as a problem to be fixed, but as a group who are being failed by a system set up for Pākehā. The narrative you wrap around data can completely change how that data is contextualized and therefore understood. Today I want to show you different ways to frame this data. Some will be more effective than others. But before we dive in, I want to share a simple yet powerful way to structure a narrative. Learning this was a breakthrough in my own ability to tell stories. You probably recognize a good story when you hear one, but understanding how to structure one will help you to create one too. Aristotle famously said, and I'm paraphrasing, all good stories have a beginning, middle, and end. It sounds almost too simple, but don't dismiss it just yet. These three parts, beginning, middle, and end, form what's known as the 3-act structure. Act 1 sets the scene, giving the audience the context that they need. Act 2 introduces contrast, shifting the story's direction and grabbing attention. Act 3 provides a resolution, so it shows the consequence of Act 2 and brings the story to a close. A simple way to structure a story is by using anchor words. These are specific words that signal each act. Act 1 is built on agreement. Words like and, also, as well as, help connect ideas and set the stage. Act 2 introduces contrast. Words like but, however, despite, shift the direction and create tension. Act 3 leads to a resolution. Words like therefore, so, as a result, bring the story to its conclusion. These words act as signposts, guiding the audience through the narrative. When working with data, you don't need to cram this into every act. You might use data in Act 1 to establish context and set the scene, and let Acts 2 and 3 develop without it. Or you may hold on to the data until Act 3, using it to drive home your conclusion. How much data you include and where you include it depends on your audience. If they are not data people, don't overwhelm them with numbers. At its core, a data story isn't just about graphs and statistics. It's about communicating a message, one that's often much bigger than any single data point. Now I'm going to show you a few ways my breast cancer data can be framed using the 3-act structure. Some of these narratives will be more effective than others, but that's the point. How we frame data shapes how people interpret it. First, let's look at the numbers narrative. This is when data is presented with little to no context, just the numbers as they appear. A typical data story in this style might read, the breast cancer death rate for Pākehā is 15 in 100,000 females, but for Māori, it's nearly 23. Therefore, more focus should be put on decreasing the death rate for Māori. At first glance, it seems like a reasonable narrative. It follows the 3-act structure, introducing the numbers, highlighting the contrast, and offering a conclusion. But it's not a good data story. This approach oversimplifies a very complex issue. It presents the numbers without examining why the disparity exists. It can also be quite problematic, because when you strip away context, people tend to fill the gaps with their own assumptions. I love this quote from Eli Holder. Even though he was describing a data visualization, I think the same can be applied to narratives. For problems as big and messy as inequality and structural racism, if it's complicated, isn't one of the viewer's main takeaways, then the chart, or narrative in this case, is doing something wrong. And that's exactly the problem with a numbers-only narrative. It doesn't make the system visible, it just presents an outcome. So let's try a different narrative. The deficit narrative. Again, I don't recommend this approach, but I want to show it to you because it might sound familiar. Aotearoa has a national breast cancer screening program for women aged 45 to 69 years old. And research shows that when a Māori and Pākehā woman enter the health system after a similar diagnosis, they have equal health outcomes. However, Māori women are 1.5 times more likely to die from breast cancer than Pākehā women, because they are more likely to live in areas with fewer healthcare services, less likely to access private healthcare, and less likely to get screened as early as Pākehā women. Therefore, more education and outreach efforts should be directed towards Māori communities to encourage earlier screening. I want to be clear here, the deficit narrative is not recommended. It's unfair and it doesn't tell the full story. This type of narrative tends to focus on what the disadvantaged group is lacking. In this case, it highlights that Māori women live in more deprived areas and are less likely to pay for private healthcare and don't screen as early. But here's the issue. It subtly shifts the responsibility for the disparity onto Māori women themselves, instead of addressing the broader systemic issues that create these barriers in the first place. Remember when I said that inequality can be framed either as deficit or privilege? So let's look at the other side of the coin, the privilege narrative. This story might read, Pākehā women have a lower breast cancer death rate compared to Māori women, and these differences in health outcomes are often framed as individual choices or actions. However, Pākehā women are more likely to be able to make these choices. They are generally more able to afford private screenings and tend to live in areas with higher quality healthcare resources. Therefore, the lower death rate among Pākehā women reveals an advantage that allows them to benefit from better access to care. This narrative shifts the focus from the disadvantaged group to the advantaged group, which can be helpful in reframing biases. But while it's a step in the right direction, it still doesn't tell the full story. While we're now seeing that Pākehā women's lower death rates is partly due to better access to care, we haven't fully explored why these advantages exist in the first place. What systems are at play that allow Pākehā women to have these benefits? And what structures are keeping them from Māori women? Understanding that will take us closer to the root of the problem. So let's look at this from another perspective, a system perspective. Because at the heart of it, that's what creates these differences in data. It's not the Māori people, it's not the Pākehā people, it's a system that has been shaped over time. A system that continues to influence the outcomes we see today. If we want to understand why these disparities exist in the data, we need to look at the rules, the policies, and the structures that have led us here. Yes, the system is ultimately run by people, but it operates based on the way things are set up to function. Systems can create patterns of advantage and disadvantage that persist even when no one is consciously trying to make things unfair. When we share ethnicity data, we can talk about how the system is failing groups of the population that it wasn't set up to advantage. For example, Māori women are 1.5 times more likely to die from breast cancer than Pākehā women. It's easy to focus on lifestyle factors and assume that Māori women are simply making different decisions about their health. However, the reality is far more complicated. Breast cancer death rates are not just a reflection of individual choices, they are shaped by how the health system functions. For example, screening programs do not reach all communities equally. Māori women are more likely to be diagnosed at a later stage, not because they're making different choices, but because of systemic barriers. These barriers are rooted in a system designed to meet the needs of Pākehā. Pākehā women are more likely to benefit from a system that works in their favour. Therefore, we must move beyond simply encouraging earlier screenings or providing more education to Māori communities to close this gap. Real change requires addressing the structural barriers that prevent Māori women from accessing the same level of care as Pākehā. Equitable access to care is not just about providing services, it's about removing the barriers that prevent some from fully benefiting from those services. This is the kind of narrative I recommend. It doesn't pit people against each other, it unites them against a system that's unfair. It acknowledges the advantages and disadvantages some groups experience without assigning blame to them. And it challenges us to reflect on the biases that shape how we interpret the data and the actions that we take in response. In the end, the focus should always be on reforming the system to work for everyone. What I want you to take away today is that while you can analyze data and structure it into a compelling narrative, the story the data tells can change dramatically depending on the context that you provide. And often that context is shaped by your perspective. As the data storyteller, you hold incredible power in how people interpret and understand the data you communicate. But as the Spider-Man saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. You have a responsibility to the people represented in that data. The data isn't just numbers, it's the lives of real people. You need to ensure that the story you tell leads to understanding, awareness, and ultimately action. Because the way we frame data can shape perspectives and can drive change. Data storytelling is a powerful communication tool, one that anyone who works with data should master. You will never be a great analyst if you don't know how to effectively communicate your work to others. My name is Kat Greenbrook and I work as a data storyteller. If you'd like to dive deeper into the world of data storytelling, I've written a book on it, The Data Storyteller's Handbook. You can find out more information on the book and the work that I do at roguepenguin.co.nz. Ngā mihi nui, thank you for joining me today.